We're about to kick off with Pete Higgins, who's from the Punchdrunk enrichment team. Who's been to a Punchdrunk production, one of their theatrical productions? So some people, but not everyone. You might have to tell a little bit about who you guys are. Another one. Okay, so please welcome Pete.
You did a really good job, David, of holding this microphone here all of the time. I'm not sure how good a job I'm going to do. Hello, everybody. So I'm Pete Higgin. I'm from Punchdrunk. I run our enrichment department, which is kind of our fancy term for education and outreach. And I've been working on the I've sort of founded the department in 2008, and I've been working with the company since 2000, when we kind of started up as a small theatre company out of Exeter University. And there's about 9 or 10 of us now, and a bigger family of another 10 people of associate artists. But the company was sort of originally founded by my good friend and colleague Felix Barrett, who's our artistic director. We've got 2 other Punchdrunk people here tonight: Alex, who works for me as our producer, and Sarah, who is our head of development, both who have had involvement on the project I'm going to talk about tonight, called Prospero's Island. Apologies for the lame PowerPoint presentation. It's really not my strength. So Punchdrunk, if you don't know, are a site-sympathetic theatre company who specialise in taking over disused or abandoned buildings and putting on theatrical productions. We essentially reject the passive obedience of traditional theatre, and we invite our audience to explore our sensory worlds. So we kind of create the whole world of a play or a production. So if there's a forest, we create a forest. If there's a bar, we create a bar. As an audience member, often you're masked and you wander around a building on your own, going wherever you want, at whatever time you want. So you're free to choose your adventure. And the worlds are fully realised, so you can look through people's drawers, you can read people's letters, you can look in suitcases. If there's a door, you should be able to open it. So it's kind of like being in your own computer game, as it were. And we fuse sort of installation art and light, sort of sound, a soundscape. Obviously lots of lighting and atmospheric effects, and also we use choreographic performance as our sort of main performance language. Often our works are silent, so it's like being in your own film and you're the camera, so you decide whether or not you've got your wide angle or your panoramic shot, or whether you're focused in on the detail of a letter. So that's kind of what the company does, and that's what we're well known for. We do other types of work. I'm going to plug our current show, which is in production at the moment. We're working on a show at the National Maritime Museum called Against Captain's Orders, for 6 to 12-year-olds and their families. If you know any London-based or greater London-based schools, or if you have any 6 to 12-year-olds, come along. It starts on the 28th of March. So we sort of do non-mask led promenade style pieces as well, and that's what that project is. Also, my interest is in the transformative effect of our work on not our own, and how we can take the transformative effect and the impact that our work has into educational and community settings. And fundamentally, we're called Punchdrunk because we aim to make our audience feel punch drunk. We don't aim to punch them. We just aim to assault their senses. Sometimes they get punched, though, by accident, by a performer. And that, we've found, has by overloading people's senses and kind of sending them reeling off around this space, it kind of unlocks all sorts of weird and wonderful parts of their brain, and people dream about the shows. People can't stop talking about the shows. People drag their friends who've never been to the theatre before along to these shows. So some people hate the shows and they don't come back. So we kind of aim to we try to avoid mediocrity. But I've always been interested, having taken my own students when I was a secondary school teacher way back then, 10 years ago. I was a drama teacher on a school on the Isle of Wight, and I took my A-level students to come and see our work, and I was really impressed by the fact that on the way home in the coach they spoke about the theatre we'd been to see and not about the party they were going to go to at the weekend, or not about the amount of alcohol they'd consumed. So no, they were really engaged, and it informed their practice. And at that point, whilst I was sort of working for Punchdrunk but was being a teacher, I was like, okay, so there's an opportunity to take this work and to take it into educational settings. So I've been doing that since 2008. We've been primarily focused on doing work in primary schools, and we essentially build mini installations with immersive narratives attached to them, which come and land in area of a school, and we kind of create that Narnian moment for a primary school pupil. They kind of walk through the door which they thought was the head teacher's office, or thought was the learning support room, or a room that they'd never been in before where only Bob the caretaker goes, and it's suddenly this magical space. A magical bric-a-brac shop, a place called the Lost Lending Library, the inside of a balloonist's canopy. That would be cool. Like a magical printing press. So lots of different fantastical scenarios, almost always starting with a storybook, a picture book, and we've worked in probably around 60 or 70 schools, mainly in London, and to pretty, rave reviews from primary school teachers. We've barely done any marketing. Generally speaking, it's head teacher to head teacher recommendation, and the work is quite expensive. We work it out, it's about 20 quid per pupil for a project which lasts about 3 weeks. But that mounts up when you're working with the whole of the school. I won't go too much into our primary school work. I'll make sure that we post a video, maybe on Twitter, but under the eider down. I'm looking at Alex because, and you can have a look at that work. But basically, so we cracked primary schools in a certain sense, and it's good to add that basically, after you've seen a Punchdrunk show, often you want to kind of talk about it loads and loads and go, I did this and I did that, and then I went here, and then this person grabbed me and they took me in a room, and I was completely overwhelmed by the whole experience. And I basically wanted to take that idea of making somebody feel like that and take it into a primary school and get children who were reluctant to write, reluctant to be creative, and actually, dupe them into being creative and dupe them into wanting to write. And basically, we give them agency. We tell them that our characters need them to be able to, they need their stories to be able to progress through their life and to solve this major problem they have in their shop or their library or their wherever. And generally speaking, the kids are so excited and wrapped up in a story that they do it, and they love it, and they kind of get swept away with it, and why wouldn't you? So the key for us was to try and take this project into secondary schools, or a version of this work into secondary schools. And it was a long time coming, and a couple of key moments were when we did a project which was, we piloted it at Rosebruford College in Sidcup, and we created basically a HTML5 app. Look at me sounding all techie. And you played your way through a narrative, and we invited students at the college to play their way through this narrative and to level up. But as you got further through this game, you went from doing like a very simple push a button game, and then you got invited to a strange interview, and then you got invited to go and do work for somebody around, you basically work for this corporation which had appeared at Rosebruford College. And I thought, hey, hang on a minute, this gaming approach could work for secondary schools. And then we sat on it for about 4 or 5 years, and then we got together with the Hackney Learning Trust, and we got Petchy Academy, who are a school in Hackney, who are actually an academy and not really much to do with the Learning Trust. But anyway, we managed to get those two guys on board, and decided that we would tackle Shakespeare in secondary schools. We'd look at the Tempest, and we'd work with years 7 and 8, and we would create a compelling and engaging project which would enthuse pupils about the joys of Shakespeare, would get them being creative, and would impact their writing. And we would also impact teacher pedagogy and get them being more immersive in terms of the way they delivered their teaching. This was the condition of the funding from the Hackney Learning Trust. and at the time it felt quite like, can we not just make the project and then see how it goes, and then do another project and do all of the research and study around it. So we were initially thinking that we would make this project. We're not very good at kind of digital technology, but that's not what we do as a company. We're very analog. We're very about experience. And I'd kind of had it in my head that we were going to do this thing where we'd have iPads, and we'd have people connected to other people via some strange device, and we'd be communicating via iPads. And I didn't quite know how the technology was going to work, but that was the idea. And I think what we were trying to articulate was that we were going to take a gaming mechanic and then kind of to use that as a starting point for our project. And we took the Tempest and we came up with this project which was called Prospero's Island. We spent a lot of time sat around in a room going, how are we going to make this into a game? How are we going to make this into a game? How are we going to make this into a game? And I think, well, I'm going to talk about that, but I'll just talk you through what we came up with. So Prospero's Island, our kind of secondary school, I should have clicked to that. That's a much more interesting picture to look at, isn't it? So the Tempest. If people don't know the Tempest, a very quick summary of the Tempest. So we've got an island. On that island lived Prospero, who's the usurped Duke of Milan, his daughter Miranda. They've basically been kicked out of Milan, and his brother's taken over Milan. They've sent him away to an island, and actually his friend Gonzalo down there has made sure that he gets to an island safely, and he's got his books. So Prospero neglected his duties as a ruler and spent all of his time studying. And his brother, meanwhile, snuck in the back door and booted him out and became the Duke of Milan. So him and his daughter have been there. Ariel and Caliban are natives of the island, for want of a better term. Caliban is his mum, Sycorax, used to kind of be mistress of the island, and Ariel used to be Ariel was trapped in a tree. Anyway, so they're on the island, and basically Prospero's a magician, and he makes Alonso, Sebastian, Antonio, Gonzalo, Adriano, and Francisco crash on this island, and Stefano and Trinculo, and Ferdinand, in fact. So everybody down here is shipwrecked on this island, and it's basically the play is not. It doesn't, in terms of time, it doesn't really take long for the narrative to unfold. It's over like a day or so, and the guys who crash land are split up. So Ferdinand lands somewhere, Stefano and Trinculo land somewhere else, and the other guys land over there. And I always get mixed up with all of these guys. Anyway, so is it Sebastian who is the? No, Alonso is his brother. No, who's his brother? Antonio. Anyway, one of those is his brother, and they basically want to. Basically, they all get drawn towards Prospero, and Caliban meets up with these guys, Stefano and Trinculo, who are basically they're like the jokers. They're the fools of the play. Ferdinand is a love interest for Miranda, and Prospero's kind of controlling all of these people. He's bringing Alonso and his crew towards him because he's going to make them repent and say sorry for kind of kicking him off the island. He's bringing Stefano. He treats Caliban as his slave, and he hates him. And they try and take over the island as well, unsuccessfully, and Prospero basically makes his daughter Miranda fall in love with Ferdinand, basically so that he can then join forces with Alonso and go back to being the Duke of Milan. And Ariel, meanwhile, is basically the guy who does all the magic for Prospero, and is trying to get freed from under Prospero's powers. So that's a really bad way of describing the Tempest, and if you know the Tempest well, I do apologise. But so basically, we in our piece we make our way through the play via some levels, and so we've got the acts 1 to 5 down here, like any Shakespeare play's got 5 acts, and we've got our levels that we go through. Island map, the portraits, Prospero's books, power, loyalty, treachery, the Brave New World, Captivity and Liberty, and the Future. So just to talk you through how it works. So basically, the main kind of mechanic of our project was literary task. So taking the text of the Tempest and making, inviting our students to engage with that and to discuss it and to do creative tasks around it, and then to feed that back in reward for that. They'd get to go on a mission, and that mission would help them discover a new part of the play, and by doing that they unlock a level and they unlock the next stage of the Tempest. So that was our base mechanic. So an example of that is on level 4, which we'll look at in a minute. We've got 3 groups. We've got 15 children in the experience for 2 hours. We've got 3 groups. One do a crime scene report, one do a policy sheet, one do a monster portrait. One was looking at the Royals camp, one looking at the haunted roof, and one looking at the drunks camp. And we had and I'll go on to explain more about the setup for it, but we had areas around the school which these guys went and visited. And one was the Royals camp, one the haunted roof, and one the drunks camp. And basically by fulfilling that literary task, they unlock this mission where they go and find more information, and that unlocks an element of the installation, which I'll talk more about. So basically, the way the experience begins is the students just get called out at the start of the day. They get told at registration, you guys, you're going to go and meet in the dinner hall. You're going to be doing an English workshop on the Tempest. Go and meet somebody over there. And they line up outside, and one of them gets given a key around their neck. And then our practitioners meet them. They're kind of dressed up very normally, kind of shirt, tie. And they don't look out of place in a secondary school. And then we go into this space here, which is very film noir, kind of panelled walls, a hexagon-shaped room. So we walk into this space in the school, which is usually their reading room, which is now turned into this kind of slightly kind of Cold War spy-esque sort of space with a big table in the middle. And they sit down, and suddenly a voice, a disembodied voice, comes over the microphone saying, your mission over the next 2 hours is to uncover the story of the Tempest. I'm going to give you the first scene for free. Lights go down, massive thunderclap, and then we hear the first scene of the Tempest, the storm scene, or a sort of very kind of shortened version of that. We hear the storm scene. So we sort of whiz through Act 1, and then the next thing that happens is that we're told that there's a key hidden somewhere in the room which will unlock the next level. Somebody's been given a key as they first come in. That key's around their neck. They take that key, and this big round table that's in the middle of the space, there's a lock. They put the key in the lock, and they turn it, sound effects. Suddenly the central panel of the table flips round to reveal a map of their school. And in the school they had this big, I think we'll see a picture of it actually. This flipped round, used to be just flat table, flipped round, and this was kind of map of the island crossed with a kind of ground plan of their school, and that central bit in the middle was a big kind of hall space in the middle of the school. So they unlock the island, they unlock their school, so they find out that their island is transposed with the school, and that they're going to potentially have to make their way around the school to unlock the story of the Tempest. So this is these guys here, not in school uniform, are our practitioners, our assistants, as we like to call them. They're kind of part character, part kind of classroom assistant. And they kind of shepherd these guys through the piece. So they know what's going to happen, and they know how a level unlocks, but they're not allowed to kind of... They do this Groundhog Day for 12 days, but they have to appear that they don't know what's going to happen next. So level 2, they basically find out the family tree of the play. So as we're going, one of the other main things we want to do with this project is to kind of make sure they have the story of the Tempest fully embedded, and they understand the key themes and the characters. Ignore what I just said at the start. The piece itself does a much better job than I'll ever do at explaining the Tempest in 5 minutes. So they are there's lots of cryptic clues about. I found the content. Basically, there's a flap in the corner of the room, and a mission comes through. It says, "I found 3 suitcases today, but the contents didn't quite add up." And they find these 3 suitcases which are just placed around the room, and you don't really notice when you go in. They look through them. All of the suitcases belong to a different character from the royals' camp, and they find numbers on them within the literature. Like there's one letter from Ferdinand saying, "I'm 1,000 leagues from home and I've just shipwrecked." Quite how he sent that letter, how anybody's got it, is another thing. But we find out more about the character through the suitcase. We find out this number. We find 3 numbers which we add together, and we then get a clue about where we might use this. So there's something about suitcases, and there's also in this cryptic clue, there's the fate of a family hangs by a thread, and that's basically a picture of Prospero and Miranda in a boat. If we lift off that picture off the wall, we find a safe. The codes unlock the safe. We open the safe, we get the family tree. Behind the painting as well is there's basically lots of different names of characters. Well, there's names of characters on the pictures, but underneath there's a short description. So they've got to match the character to the description. So it's kind of a comprehension. It's a comprehension thing. It's a kind of knowledge, their knowledge of the characters that they have to display them, and they've got some of that information already from the classes they've been doing. So they create this family tree, and that seemingly unlocks the next level, which is basically our characters pressing a button which sends a sound effect or opens. So there's no kind of, although we make it feel like a computer game, and although it would be great if we were able to make it into something which hugely relied on them putting the last painting on the family tree, it's all about the human is the computer. So this is them looking at the pictures. If things don't make any sense, you can ask me questions at the end. So level 3, so every time they open something up, there's a sense of, there's a theme. We open up a theme of the play. So we basically open up this, what was a hexagon, suddenly a wall pulls to one side, and we reveal this library. And this library is kind of all about science and magic. So the overlap between Prospero's obsession with science and how science kind of merges into magic. So we're also trying to kind of expand the pupils and the students' kind of reading list and getting them to look at different texts as well. So there's the science and magic thing going on. There's also other relevant texts in there as well, like Lord of the Flies and Robinson Crusoe. So they unlock this, and they also get some grid references. And these grid references make sense in terms of that map that we just saw there. And those grid references then send them out into the school. They get given radios. We've got radios, and our assistants look after one group. They go out in groups of 5, and they have to go to these grid references on the map. And they then spend about 5 or 10 minutes getting lost around the school that they know really well. And they end up finding 3 separate lockers: Ariel's locker, Caliban's locker, and Miranda's lockers. And they're all themed differently. So Ariel's is all about nature and all about a tree, and Ariel being locked in a tree. Caliban's locker is all about anger and resentment towards Prospero, and Miranda's locker is all about love and her love for Ferdinand. And this is them at Caliban's locker. So they find this locker, which is, it's like a normal locker. It's a school locker, but it's put in a slightly weird position. They unlock the locker with the key they've got, and they find these little buildings or symbols, and they bring them back to our hub. And basically, these things fit in gaps on the map. And once we put them all into the gaps on the map, boom, we open up another level. And so we've gone to a locker. Level 4, there's another cryptic clue, and I can't remember all the cryptic clues, but they lead us to these books on a bookshelf. And the books, we open them up, and a reference leads us to grid references and lead us to 3 separate locations. One on the roof of the school. The school were generally really helpful, and they let us go on their roof, which sounds really dangerous, but it was all really safely managed. And some of them go to another roof. So some of them go to one of the royals' camp, and they discover a scene whereby they discover sort of the scene where the royals attempt to murder some of the other royals. Another one is the enclosed roof. It's like Ariel's lair, and the other one is behind a container somewhere else in the school, which is basically evidence of the drunk. So we're finding out about these three separate kind of strands of the play. So we've kind of gone from locker to kind of outdoor space, which is slightly more treated and slightly more kind of dressed, but not really heavily dressed. They find codes which lead them to a book on the bookshelf. They pull that book. That then opens up a screen on the wall, and suddenly a TV screen appears, and we have a short video about power, loyalty and treachery. Basically then they go back out and they find three new spaces, and these spaces are kind of internal spaces, and they're dressed. And we've got this space here was in a biodome. No, this space here was, actually no, what we're looking at there is the space behind a container. This is them looking at the TV, sorry. Level 5, Brave New World, Utopia and Dystopia. They find keys behind, and this is kind of rambly, I know, but they basically, the next clue leads them back to, leads them out to these spaces, and that I just talked about, and they find Caliban's lair, they find Prospero's lab, and they also find a woodland area where Miranda and Ferdinand kind of play chess and fall in love. And here we are in Prospero's lab. This is the wooded area. And this is back to level 6. So they basically come back and they get sent straight back out again to these spaces. And then we've gone from dress space, now we go to dress space with performer. And they kind of have a little one-on-one. And they kind of disobey our games master. So whilst we're going through this whole experience, they're kind of doing this comprehension task, they're going out on these missions, they're finding out more about the Tempest, they're unlocking more and more stories. And they're also feeding back to this games master, who is kind of a bit of a sort of threatening character. And although, and I'll talk about this a bit more, although they couldn't fail, it was always like a test, it was always set up as a game, so there was always a sense that they were reporting back to this master. And this master, who by the end appears to be like this slightly malevolent Prospero character. So they're constantly doing that, and they actually disobey Prospero. They get told to go in one direction, and when they go out, the assistants intercept them and say, look, I want to take you somewhere. And it suddenly clicks to them then that actually the assistants are Ariel, Caliban and Miranda. And they take them to these spaces, and they kind of plea with them, and they sort of, they talk about how, you know, how much they need their freedom and how much they're being controlled, and how bad, you know, they basically plead for them. And the last level becomes about them coming back, and the assistants aren't there initially, and they are asked, they're told off for not obeying Prospero, our games master, and they're sort of told that they need to plea for their individual characters, and they plead for them, and they have to kind of make cases for why. They basically have to make a case for why Miranda should be free, they have to make a case for why Caliban should be free, and they have to make a case for why Ariel should be free. And what we're also doing throughout the experience is trying to get them to look at the kind of the good side of Caliban, for one, you know, to make it quite simplistic, and the bad side of Caliban, and also the different sides to all the characters. So they do that. They also get locked in the space, and they have to get out. And all of a sudden, the whole space goes UV. The table's flipped round, and there's a locked box on there, and there's a bunch of constellations and stars all over the ceiling and all over the walls, and there's 3 there's Ceres, Juno, and Iris, who are all kind of Greek goddesses who are in the play, and their constellations have numbers next to them, and those numbers relate to these padlocks on the box. They open the padlock, they reveal a button, they press a button, and finally the last panel of the hexagon door opens up, and they are released from Prospero's grips. So, this is the locked box. This is just before the room goes UV. I said the assistants weren't there, but actually at the start the assistants weren't there for this part, and we realised that they needed to be there, otherwise the children went wild and didn't focus. And it was amazing how crazy they all go when all the lights turn UV and their shirts glow, and they're like, "Wah!" So they all get told off a little bit by Prospero, and they all get told that they need to get out, and they need to solve how to get out. And there's a sense of time running out, and the music's kind of making it feel like tenser and tenser and tenser. So it's really hard to talk that through, to kind of talk about it, because so much detail involved in it. There's a stage manager running around the back of this space, pulling open shutters when they need to pull them open. They're delivering a set of, it was like a paper, kind of paper props list, like, to the end of your arm. Tasks, and there's different task pro formas for each level. But I suppose I just wanted to talk. If it doesn't make sense, ask me some questions, which I'm sure it won't. But I just wanted to talk about the successes and the challenges. And what we found difficult initially is, like, the challenges were into implementing a gaming structure into an existing narrative, because the one thing you don't want to do when you're doing a piece about the Tempest is fundamentally muck around with the Tempest. We're really trying to teach these students about the Tempest. So despite my synopsis at the start, we went through the play in an ordered manner. And they did get a sense of the narrative and the progression of the narrative, and how the characters developed. So, but there was those two things don't really sit very well together. When you've got this existing narrative, it's hard. We struggled with putting the gaming structure in, and the kind of major breakthrough for us were to kind of make engaging with the text and with the play the mechanic in itself. So actually, don't try and turn the Tempest and the story of the Tempest into the game. Make the currency for kind of accessing this game the Tempest and the language. So they studied key scenes throughout, and the reward was going to the lockers with the radio. The reward was going to this roof space that you'd never been before. The reward was going to meet Caliban, who was in a kind of smelly, bone-filled room, in a transformed space, and having this weird encounter. So we were kind of making the theatre and the immersive experience the reward, but the way you get that reward is to engage with the play and engage with the narrative. So once we kind of decided to do that, everything kind of fell into place for us. Pitching the setup, when we do this work in primary schools, we can kind of, we've got kids who believe that Santa Claus is, and we can lie freely to them, and we can kind of, there's awe and wonder and magic. And actually we were working with years 7 and 8, and there's a borderline there. We could almost do that with these guys, but we chose not to, because we would have been spending so much time trying to lie to them about how this thing had magically appeared in their school that we would never have got round to doing any of the real work of, progressing through the Tempest. So we kind of just pitched it. They didn't know it was going to happen. They didn't know anything about it. They just turned up on the day, and they just took it at face value. They went into a room which was strange looking for the school, and they get told they were going to play a game which would take them through the Tempest, and it would take 2 hours. And that's all we said, and that worked. Challenges for the future, I suppose, are the tourability of the project and the cost. We've kind of got this thing that works for the Tempest, but we're aware that not every school's going to want to tackle the Tempest. And it's not cheap. So in terms of like, it's interesting listening to David about like business models and stuff. We're not trying to kind of, we're not trying to sell this to schools as a profit making thing. We're trying to raise funds to do this project again, because the impact so far has been really positive, actually. But that said, we built something for one room in a school. Whether or not we're going to find the same size room somewhere else, whether or not this thing will translate to Macbeth, for example, is another thing. So failure versus success in the game mechanic, and it was really, we didn't have a game that you could fail at. So you can't fail at this game. We made sure that you made it through, and actually that worked to our advantage, because what you actually did was you scaffolded the work that we did with the pupils as much as you needed to. If you had high ability, you didn't scaffold what you were doing with them. They kind of had to come up with the answers. And the games master would often just question them more and more until they got the answer they wanted to hear. But also, you know, whatever happened, everybody would make it through, because we also didn't want anybody to fail at it, because we wanted people to have a successful journey, and we wanted them to feel good about themselves, and we didn't want to kick anybody out saying, hey, you failed, all of your mates didn't. So, but when we first talked about it, we were talking about having a leaderboard and who had the most points and who engaged best and who learnt more about Shakespeare than anybody else, and actually we just didn't have the resource or the kind of brain to do that, nor did it actually matter. So I suppose there was a perceived game mechanic there, but it wasn't like it was controlled by humans, and it wasn't as if, you know, nobody ever failed at any point. But we just pushed the students until we got the right answer out of them. So performal wear and tear, nah. No, it's pretty hardcore for those guys. They're kind of working quite intensively with 15 pupils day in, day out for 12 days, and that takes a certain kind of person. And if we do it again, we're going to have to think about how we keep them sane, because they're also living this thing Groundhog Day, and they know where this is going, but they have to act like they don't know where this is going. And actually, strangely enough, we never had any of the students going, hang on a minute, you do this every day, what, you know, surely you know where the answer is, just tell us where the answer is. They all kind of bought into that, and they never challenged that, actually, which was interesting. And we got told by the teachers, oh, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. Somebody's going to tell somebody else. But we did actually set up at the start, whatever happens in this room goes no further. Don't tell anybody else about it. And actually, they really respected that, and that's really interesting. And I mean, even when we do work in primary schools, although it's different by the end of the 2 weeks, when you get to the end of the school, it's not. People still enjoy it and still go through it. And I've done a really bad job of explaining the its and outs of a 2-hour experience. And actually, if you asked the child to recount everything that happened and the answer to every clue, they probably couldn't, because it's quite complex and there's so many steps to the whole thing happening. It was successes. It was a great collaboration. The school were amazing. They really wanted to do it. They accessed some of their funding from the Jack Petrie Foundation. The Hackney Learning Trust have signed up to us for with a 3-year relationship, and we're trying to push this project to more and more schools. Doesn't necessarily we've got any more money to do it, but they did front up the costs to develop the project in the first place, which was great of them. The school absolutely loved it, and they really enjoyed it. The teachers. So a big part of the project was about impacting teacher pedagogy, and we were trying to see how this kind of intervention could impact teacher practice. Which is really interesting when you're beginning to think about everything else they've got to worry about. So we did confront a lot of teachers when we were doing some of the wraparound insets, saying, how's this going to help me in science? You know, I've got all of this background noise going on at the moment. I don't need this in my life. But we similarly got teachers who are happy to kind of just be left to dream for 2 hours or however long it was, and kind of were happy to kind of indulge their fantasies. But yeah, generally the feedback from the school was really positive, and although we haven't got but the project's been evaluated or is being evaluated by the Open University, we don't have any of that data to share at the moment, but we have looked at a little bit of raw data from some Year 7s who went through it, and looking at their base. So they did a cold writing task to begin with, and they did a writing task based on the Tempest afterwards. And, for whatever that's worth academically, based on where they should have been getting to and where they've actually got to, there's a fair amount of pupils who are kind of exceeding that. Whether that's got anything to do with the work that we've done is another thing altogether. But the most important thing for me is talking to teachers and them telling me, look, I've taken my groups so much further than I ever would have done in a conventional classroom setting approaching the Tempest. We're kind of really delving a lot deeper into the themes and the topics, and we're kind of looking at characters in a much deeper way than we normally would. So the pupils are actively engaged in that play, and they're, in terms of the Tempest, they're questioning, well, is Caliban good, or is he, that we're looking at subjectivity there, and they're getting impassioned about it because they've had that connection with that character who suddenly revealed themselves as Caliban or Miranda or Ariel. So they've had that Punchdrunk experience. They've had that experience they'll not forget. They'll have that experience which is going to stimulate creativity and stimulate their imagination. So, yeah, and the other good thing is that we've done this, and although it was a bit kind of scary at the start, kind of putting loads of pressure on a project and going, okay, the OU are going to come in and we're going to spend quite a lot of money on them assessing this project. It's actually really good because we're going to get data at the end of it, and we're going to get really kind of good academic data on this project and the impact of this project on pupils and teachers. And actually, as is often the case with arts organisations, the evaluation is an afterthought, and it's not objective and it's not independent, and it's not necessarily something which you can share meaningfully with it's not something that necessarily speaks to other teachers, and this should have some weight to it. So that's kind of me done talking. And I mean, in terms of the future of the project, we're talking to a school in North Hackney. They really want to take it on board. We have to work out how we're going to fund it, because it costs quite a lot of money. But we're now looking at working with them, inviting other feeder schools, their primary schools, to come in and working with other schools around the area. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking. Sorry that I got deep into that, and then and I genuinely mean this, although I might have not done a great job at kind of explaining it. Like, the work is genuinely meant to be experienced, and actually it doesn't translate easily to this sort of scenario or even to video. So it's kind of, it was a really complex, it's probably one of the most complex projects we've done, and it was a 2.25 hour experience for the pupils, with like a 10-minute break in the middle. It was like going to watch a slightly shortened version of a Shakespeare play. So, questions?
Thank you. One question over here.
Hi, thanks very much. I have 3 really quick, short questions. Do the kids get to read The Tempest before, or is it something they've studied, or they do after?
It was running over 2 weeks. We basically set a homework task for the pupils to kind of look at The Tempest and to study a number of characters beforehand. And actually, if you imagine if you were in the first class, which started just after half term, you'd not done loads of work on The Tempest, you'd just done that. But if you came in at the end, you'd probably done 2 weeks worth of The Tempest in English. So it varied, but it didn't seem to necessarily impact on how well they accessed the work, because we did quite a lot of work at kind of explaining every stage of the piece. But what we actually found was that the higher ability students didn't engage with it as enthusiastically as the lower ability students. Actually, the lower ability students were more fun to be around, and they were like more willing to take risks and to say the wrong answer, and to kind of, they didn't really give a toss if they sounded stupid. Whereas the higher ability students were like, they didn't want to say the wrong answer. They didn't want to expose themselves. So actually, it was just like pulling teeth sometimes to try and get them to kind of to draw the stuff out of them.
Thank you. So I'll just ask the two questions in one go. And do the teachers get to go through the experience? Is one, and the last one is, I think you sort of touched on this just at the very end. If you had your own site and you brought the kids in, you could do this one sort of repeat. I don't know if that's, is there some point to it being in their school, because that somehow is part of this Narnia sort of moment?
So yes, the teachers go through. So there was always their class teacher with them and a teaching assistant as well. So they definitely needed to go through and have that experience. And they also, and they weren't part of the experience, so they kind of engaged with it. You know, so that there was no, they weren't part, they weren't, and also they weren't they were there just in case there was behaviour issues, but there never really was. In terms of, I really believe in doing work on site. Funnily enough, I just had a meeting the other week where we were talking about taking the project off site, but it's a half-day experience at a school and it's got 15 pupils, so if you want to take a whole class out, you've got to have travel time, you've got to site it in a place which is, you know, ideally located for a number of different schools. You probably want to bump it up to 30 to make it worthwhile bringing a whole class at once, and also you don't necessarily get that kind of knock-on impact of it being in the school and that being a special thing and impacting the rest of the teachers. So there's arguments for that to work, and we've, you know, when we've done work in bigger sites, we've brought schools in and that works, but actually there's something quite special about housing it in a school. And also because it just makes you look at your school in a different way. You're like, oh, hang on a minute, that kind of thing can happen at school. So that's definitely a model we've played with and may explore.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I really love what you're doing. My question is about the evaluation and what is it that is being evaluated, and whether they're looking sort of at academic performance or at sort of creativity and imagination, and whether it's, and I would hope that it might be able to be longitudinal. Really, it would be so interesting to follow these kids, I mean like 10 or 15 years, and see what, you know, because I think this is a really extraordinary and special experience, and how it impacts them after high school or whatever the equivalent is here. So
yeah, so there's a mixture. There's a lot of observations of classes before, during and after. So the teachers went in with their pupils afterwards. So we did 2 weeks of kind of delivery, and then the installation stayed in school till the end of term. So the teachers and the pupils mocked up an experience, sort of slightly less theatrical experience for parents, on parents. So there's that element of it. So there's teacher interviews. So definitely looking at teacher impact as well and impact on them. The main pupil data was mainly because this was, you know, what we could afford, and what was and the driver for Learning Trust was to look at the sort of impact on literacy and to look on attainment levels. And so there was a cold writing task, and then there was a writing task at the end. So it's sort of fairly standard stuff, but we are going back in, well, I say we, the Open University are going back into the schools in March to look at the teachers, to look at so there's a slight longitudinal thing there, but not massive. But again, that's resource, and we'd love to do that. And we're, you know, there's lots of interesting stuff happening in the arts at the moment in terms of research grants, and they're all talking about, you know, legacy and impact over time. But the reality is, unless you're, I suppose, a practitioner and a researcher and have the time to do that, that you're not, you know, you're not able to set up that 10+ model where we follow children down the line. But I believe that for me, you have those days in school where you're that turn you on or off school massively, and actually what I kind of, you know, what drives us is making those days which turn you on to school massively and make you keep on coming back. So yeah, so I wish we could follow them, and it would be great, but we're not.
We haven't got very much time left, I'm afraid.
Can I just share a tweet that relates to that? Sorry, you might just to share with you. A former pupil of mine she follows me on Twitter, and the value of tweeting about this evening is that she's now a blogger and involved in writing, and she says, "I will never forget Punchdrunk's Faust that I went to on a school trip." That's with the school I teach at. I love their work so much I went to see The Drowned Man twice after it, and it helped inspire her to become what she is now, which is a writer. Great. So that's a kudos to you.
Yeah. I love the sort of theatrical sense of disbelief that you built into the game thing. The bit intrigued me when they went out with the assistants and had to come back and plead on their behalf. Were they pleading for the assistants as people that they were working with on the day, or were they pleading for them as the characters in the play, or did you even know that, or were they able to distinguish between those things? I mean, how far was disbelief suspended?
It was kind of a mixture of both of those things, and actually it was funny, nobody ever noticed when they put the portraits on up at the start that 3 of the characters were our assistants. Nobody ever twigged that. They only ever twigged it at the end, and they were like, "Oh, you're Caliban, you're Ariel," and it was really subtle, and it wasn't like, becoming Ariel, and in our minds there was a really long crossfade throughout the 2 hours where they turned from being the assistant to being Ariel. But actually, it was kind of, they were the assistants and they were Ariel both at once. It was more about the fact that they suddenly revealed that, and the pupils were like, "Oh." So yeah, for that.
Before or after the pleading?
I know it was before it. So they do that, and then they plead for them. And actually, they did come back in with them, and it was like kind of going, "Look, these guys have disobeyed them. You got to plead for these guys." And we talked a long time about, should we just release one person after that? And actually, when we first started devising it, it was all about freeing Ariel. So we were hinging the whole thing around, because Ariel's constantly going, "Master, can I stop now? Can I stop? I've helped you. I've done what I said I'd do. You told me you'd release me." And in the play, it's debated about whether or not he actually gets released. So we were originally hinging it around free Ariel, but actually that fell down, and we changed it. So yeah, so it was blurring that wasn't clear. And actually, the fact that wasn't clear is what we played around with, and we'd try and play around with that blurring of fiction and reality. And if we had all the time in the world, we'd try and blur the whole thing into school, so it just appeared and then disappeared, and you never knew whether it was a dream or reality. But we couldn't do that. Not in a secondary school.
Was it a quick question?
Hi, you said that as a company you had no previous experience with game design. When it came to the game elements of the experience, did you develop them in-house, or did you bring in an external consultant or a designer?
We did it in-house, and we drew a lot on the project we did at Rose Bruford. At times we wished we'd brought in somebody, and actually I think we're really interested in this crossover between our work and gaming, and mostly because a lot of people have compared it to like being in your own game world, and I keep saying to Felix, why don't we get somebody in from the gaming world and they can help us out? And he's actually more interested, and I think it's quite good, is to try and try and solve it ourselves, and the challenge really is making, and where we come unstuck is making a game whereby you can have a physical payoff, but at the same time potentially for everybody who starts playing it, because physical payoff costs money and takes time to resource. And if you can play the game whenever you want to play it, how do you make sure that when they find the door on the street, which they open up with a key they've got sent through the post, that Bob's behind it to give them the one-on-one? So we're always sort of, I don't think we quite cracked it. So, but in terms of this one, it was very simple in terms of what do we do to progress through the game? What's the main mechanic? And actually, does that uncover more about the Tempest? So that was quite simple, but then there was just tricks in between, like, well, wouldn't it be good to pull a book and then that to feel like that opens that panel up, or we've got to use a laser pen in the crystal, and it'd be great if the table flipped round. So there was that kind of element of reveal and kind of the nice things. But we played, like, a few of our practitioners went to locked room scenario, and we also got quite into What's the name of that? The box. What's the name of that? The room. Yeah. No. Yeah, the room where you unlock that box, and yeah, we got into that game, which was quite inspirational to us. So and we spent a whole 2 or 3 days on an island in the middle of an estuary somewhere in Essex, trying to as part of a wider company thing, trying to kind of our big question for us is, how does gaming translate to immersive theatre? So the answer is yes, we should have got some.
That's great. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
So thank you to both our speakers and for all of you guys for coming. We're running a bit over, so if I can ask you all very kindly to head straight to the pub immediately. So Perseverance, come out of here and turn left. Can I nominate Tony to show you all the way? There you go. Follow that man there. Also want to say thank you to Yuki for hosting us. If you're doing anything with games and you don't know what Yuki do, then you really need to check them out because they've been incredibly helpful. So they're very kindly letting us have this space. But look out for our March event and hopefully see you there. Thank you.
Thank you.